Good to see all of you. And what are we going to talk about?
Keskustellaan tässä pääasiassa englanniksi. Mä käännän
you are originally from Houston. So do you still have family or friends in the area that's now affected by the floods?
Yes, I grew up in Houston, and it looks really grim there. The whole city is under a meter of water. There's no high points in Houston. Houston is just flat, and it's still raining. The water is still going up.
And in the news, I was surprised to read that it's the 4th largest city in the U.S. I wouldn't have thought that. What was it like at the time you were growing up? Was it already that big then, or has it happened afterwards?
No, when I lived in Houston, it was much smaller. At one time, my house was outside the city limits. Now, that same spot is 20 miles inside the city. Houston has long been the largest city, maybe in the world, in terms of square miles, in terms of space, but not in terms of population. Well, Mad Comics came in 1952. That was the most important comic book event ever. Harvey Kurtzman was the editor of the first 30 numbers of Mad Comics, and this was just a total revolution. Houston was and is very conservative. It never occurred to any of us to question authority or rebel against the system until we saw Mad Comics.
And what about the newspaper comics at the time?
Houston had 3 newspapers, 3 daily newspapers, and it had comics like Dick Tracy, and Little Abner, Little Orphan Annie, Archie, and some of those were pretty good. My favorite was Dick Tracy because the bad guys were so bad in Dick Tracy.
I think you said that you weren't sure whether it was meant to be a serious series or not.
Well, in its later years, Dick Tracy became so weird that it was hard to believe. He had giant snails from the moon and people from the moon. Dick Tracy's son, Junior, married Moon Maid, and I think they had a child, a hybrid human and moon person.
Eli sarjakuvia, mitä lapsuudessa näki, olivat sanomalehtisarjakuvat, ja iso yksittäinen tapahtuma oli Mad-lehden ilmestyminen, koska se opetti kyseenalaistamaan auktoriteetteja, ja se oli sarjakuvissa aivan ennen kuulumatonta.
Dick Tracy was always politically conservative, but another good one was Little Abner by Al Capp. In his early years, Al Capp was liberal, progressive, and later he turned into a conservative. Something happened to him. I think he was mugged by a couple of long-haired white guys in Washington, D.C., and he hated hippies after that. These muggers weren't hippies, of course, but Al Capp didn't know the difference. And later he was very hostile towards Joan Baez and even Robert Crumb.
And he even appears in was it film of John Lennon and Yoko, and he appears.
That notorious interview by Al Capp, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and finally John Lennon says, "Get this, I don't have to take this shit, get this guy out of here."
Eli varhainen sanomalehtisarjakuvapiirtäjä Al Cap oli erikoinen persoona, josta tuli vanhalla iällä tämmöinen konservatiivi ja varhainen tällainen hyvin konservatiivinen TV-persoona. Hän yritti tehdä uraa tällaisena niin kuin oikeiston äänitorvena ennen kuin siitä tuli niin suosittua kuin se on nykyään.
You're associated with the late 60s in San Francisco, but you started your career already in the early 60s, and that's when you started doing your own comics. Did you have any direction in mind when you started, and what were the sort of first comics that you drew and published?
At first I did single picture gag cartoons, as they're called, and then I developed Wonder Wart-Hog, which was a parody of Superman and Batman. I was the editor of the student humor magazine at the University of Texas, where I was a student, and so I did Wonder Wart-Hog for the magazine, the Texas Ranger, and they even paid me $100 a month. That was enough to live on in the early 60s.
Eli hänen sarjakuvauransa alkoi Wonder Wart-Hog, eli Terässika-sarjakuvalla yliopiston huumorilehdessä.
Were you involved with other artists and creative people already in Texas, or did that start when you moved elsewhere?
Yes, there were some. There was Jack Jackson. He worked on the student magazine also, and some others. But mainly, I met the underground cartoonists in New York and San Francisco. At one time, almost all of the underground cartoonists moved to San Francisco. Robert Crumb, Bill Griffith, Rick Griffin, Art Spiegelman, Jack Jackson, and we had our own publishing company, the Rip-Off Press, and that was the center of our social life.
But I'd like to ask you, before that happened, you tried getting work in New York, and you got to meet Harvey Kurtzman, and someone who would influence you early on.
Harvey Kurtzman was editing a monthly magazine called Help, and Kurtzman was very helpful to all the underground cartoonists, Robert Crumb and Art Spiegelman and Jay Lynch, and he published our pages first as reprints from earlier things, and then he commissioned us to do new stories. And Help magazine paid $35 a page, which isn't very good, but it's better than nothing.
And someone also working there was Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam, who was a cartoonist at the time, was the assistant editor, the managing editor of Help magazine, and he later became a film director. We were good friends. I lived on Terry Gilliam's sofa in his living room for a while.
Eli luovia ihmisiä oli jo Texasissa, ja monet heistä lopulta sitten päätyi San Franciscoon, ja myöskin New Yorkissa kokeiltiin vähän perinteisempää kustannusmaailmaa, missä tämä Madin perustaja Harvey Kurtzman päätoimitti Help-lehteä, joka oli tämmöisiä ainoita mainstreamimpia lehtiä, jotka julkaisi muun muassa Robert Crumpia ja Sheltonia aikanaan, mutta sitten ennen pitkää kaikki nämä tekijät ajelehtivat tavalla tai toisella San Franciscoon.
The other managing editors of Help magazine, the first one was the feminist Gloria Steinem and Charles Alberson, and then Terry Gilliam, and then when Terry left, Harvey Kurtzman hired Robert Crumb to be the assistant editor. And when Robert Crumb reported for his first day of work, there was Harvey Kurtzman standing in the hallway looking sad, saying that the magazine had gone bankrupt and the furniture was being taken away. So Crumb never got to be assistant editor of Help.
I was reading an old interview of yours, and you're associated with underground comics. That's the term. So you'd think of something marginal, but it's sort of hard to grasp what the publishing industry was like at the time, because it was the first attempt of your Wonder Wart-Hog comic book set that they printed 140,000 copies of, and they said it only sold 40,000, and those still sound like a very, very large numbers for today's publishing.
Yes, that was a real publisher, Millar Publishing Company in Los Angeles, and I think Wonder Wart-Hog magazine caused him to go bankrupt, unfortunately. But Underground Comics came later in San Francisco, and underground is not a good term. We prefer alternative comics, and that was a different thing entirely. It was like self-publishing nowadays, but the important thing that the Underground Comics did was to break the monopoly of the big comic book publishing companies and start a new distribution system. There were only 6 comic distributors in the United States. It's impossible. The USA is so big that one person in a truck can't be a distributor like one person could be a distributor for all of Finland or France even, but America was too big. But we broke the monopoly of the 6 big distributing companies which didn't want to take Underground Comics.
So was it a conscious decision to go in that direction, to self-publish, or was it something that sort of you drifted into?
Robert Crumb was sort of the founder of the Underground Comics movement, and Crumb's aim was to disobey all of the rules of the Comics Code Authority, which was the company that put EC Comics out of business and others. It had a number of rules, but one of which was the good guy always wins, and you can't show any blood and things like that. So Robert Crumb broke all of these rules with Zap Comics.
Eli hän sanoi, että hän pitää enemmän termistä vaihtoehtosarjakuvat kuin underground-sarjakuvat, ja se, että he julkaisivat niitä itse oman kustantamon kautta, auttoi murtamaan sarjakuvien levitysfirmojen monopolin, jotka aikaisemmin eivät suostuneet ottamaan tällaista materiaalia levitettäväkseen. So I was wondering how important was that aspect of having that freedom as a self-publisher for you? Do you think if had things gone other way and the mainstream magazines and newspapers would have been willing to publish your material, would you have been happy to go that direction, or was it also important to have that freedom to publish yourself?
Not for me. What I wanted to be was a newspaper cartoonist, and at the time there was a number of left-wing tabloid weekly newspapers all across the United States. There was the Los Angeles Free Press, the Berkeley Barb, the East Village Other in New York, and I wanted to do weekly strips for these newspapers. But when Robert Crumb published Zap Comics, then I was inspired to start doing and self-publishing my own comic books. Breaking the rules wasn't all that important to me. I think the Freak Brothers were sort of a traditional comic strip, and not all that rule breaking, a little bit maybe. Is that
the subject matter of the stories and jokes rather than the form itself?
Yeah, and eventually the big daily newspapers started dealing with these topics, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that was the domain of the weekly tabloid underground papers, and now they're all gone, with a couple of exceptions. The Detroit Free Press, which has become a normal daily newspaper.
Eli tämä sarjakuvalehtien julkaiseminen alkoi vähän niin kuin Robert Trumpin vanavedessä, ja sitä aikaisemmin hän oli ajatellut, että voisi hyvin piirtää niin kuin vaihtoehtoiselle kaupunkilehdistölle kaupunkilehtien sanomalehtisarjakuvia.
So San Francisco in the late 60s, that's sort of probably the most mythologized era and time in the last 50 years at least. Can you still remember the thing itself, or has it sort of, for you yourself, been clouded by all these stories that are now told about it?
The mythical San Francisco was the hippie neighborhood of the Haight-Ashbury, where stoned hippies were sleeping on the streets. This was pretty much over by the time I moved to San Francisco in 1968. There was an official death of the Haight-Ashbury, and the hippies moved further north to Northern California, and the Haight-Ashbury became a high crime area. Well, it was totally ruined. Now it's a gay neighborhood, but we weren't hippies. We had long hair, but as publishers we had responsibilities, and we had to go to work every day at Rip-Off Press and work like businessmen.
You were artists, but you also were running a business. So.
Yes, I was the editor, I was the artist, but we had a manager and we had an accountant, and the distribution was the main part of the work in any publishing company, and we had 3/4 of the people were working in distribution.
So was this other stuff associated with the era and place, sort of more things that happened around you? Robert Crumb said that he never associated himself with hippies at all, and made a point of saying he hated the music. He probably hated the fashion. But how about you? Were you involved in the larger counterculture movement?
Not terribly. In the 15 years I lived in San Francisco, I didn't meet but maybe a couple of California people. We were an isolated group of outsiders. As far as the music goes, the psychedelic music was very big for a while. Robert Crumb doesn't like any music that has been made since 1936, he says. I prefer the rhythm and blues and bebop jazz of the 50s.
So you're moving a couple of decades further.
Yes, but I didn't think psychedelic rock was all that great either myself.
Eli he olivat taiteilijoita ja heillä oli pitkät tukat, mutta San Franciscossa he eivät varsinaisesti olleet niin kuin hippiliikkeen osana, kun heillä oli kuitenkin kustannusyhtiö, jolla oli liiketoimintaa ja jopa kirjanpitäjä, niin heillä oli kuitenkin töitä, mitä tehdä.
So how did you come about creating the Freak Brothers? Was it Was it sort of with that audience in mind, or how did the idea come to you?
Well, the idea occurred one night. I was doing posters for a rock music venue in Austin, Texas, and the Vulcan Gas Company, and the Vulcan Gas Company also had a film program once a week. And one week there was a double feature of the Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges. And when I left, I thought I could do something that good, so I made a short film called Texas Hippies March on the Capitol. And I did the first Freak Brothers strip as an advertisement for this short film, which has been lost. But everyone liked the advertisement better than they liked the film, so I decided to be a cartoonist instead of a movie director.
Were the characters also in the film, or were they only in that marketing thing?
Yeah, they weren't exactly the Freak Brothers, but they were Texas hippies.
So maybe that gave rise to the idea that I've heard you say that some people seem to think that Freak Brothers are real people, that you actually have some real people in mind when you draw them.
Yes, a lot of people think this. It's not true, but I've met at least half a dozen real Fat Freddys that think they're the original Fat Freddy.
Eli Friikkilän veljekset alkoivat alun perin lyhyt elokuvan oheistuotteena. Elokuva siitä ei ole säilynyt kappaleita, mutta kaikki oli sitä mieltä, että nämä ohessa olleet sarjakuvat oli parempia kuin se filmi, joten hänestä tuli sitten sarjakuvapiirtäjä.
They seem to have a very varied publishing history. You published your comics in all kinds of publications, as well as ones you published yourself. Have you managed to keep track of all of them yourself?
No, I can't remember everything that happened. I don't even remember seeing some of these translations in Finnish. Maybe they're pirate editions, or maybe they're something that my agent sold to Finnish publishers.
So do you have? When did the international stuff start? When did you start selling the publishing rights to other countries?
The first translation of the Freak Brothers was Italian, Arcana Editrice in Rome, and then quickly other countries: France, Spain, Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland. England was a curious development. The English publisher now is Knockabout Comics in London, but at first they were selling the rip-off press editions that were published in the United States until the English customs decided that they couldn't import these publications that corrupted the morals of the youth. So we gave a license to Knockabout Comics, and they could publish them in England with no problem from the customs. My favorite cartoonists were Virgil Vip Parch and Don Martin in Mad Comics, and Harvey Kurtzman and other later ones. The drawing style was more like Virgil Parch.
So that was kind of the trendy modern style at the time, right?
Yes. When Virgil Parch started doing cartoons for the weekly magazines, the Saturday Evening Post, there was a number of reader complaints who wrote in that said, "Virgil Parch makes me sick at my stomach. Please don't publish any more Virgil Parch."
Eli Virgil Parch signeerasi piirroksensa nimimerkillä VIP. ja ne oli tällaisia yksiruutuisia pilakuvia, ja hänen taisi olla yksi niistä, jotka piirsi silmät samalle puolelle nenää, mutta hänen erityinen tunnusmerkki on se, että hän saattoi piirtää käteen enemmän kuin 5 sormea. The recognizing trademark was that he would draw more than 5 fingers in a hand at times.
And he would also draw both eyes on the same side of the nose, like Pablo Picasso did the same thing.
So I was thinking of old comics because I was wondering where the idea came to start splitting the Freak Brothers page so that the cat would have its own little strip at the bottom, because that's sort of what the old newspaper pages would do.
The newspapers, the Sunday papers, which printed the big one-page cartoons, had 2 formats. One format was 2 inches longer than the other, so the cartoonist had to do an extra little bit at the bottom of the page for the newspapers that had the larger format. Crazy Cat started like that. It was the small strip at the bottom of a larger one, which I can't even remember the name of.
The Family Upstairs.
The Family Upstairs.
And so you just liked the look of it and started doing it, even though you didn't have to change the format for the publications. You just did that just to begin with.
Yes, to make it look like a Sunday newspaper comic strip.
Eli Läski Freddyn kissa alkoi saada oman strippinsä Friikkilän veljessivujen alaosassa sen takia, että hän halusi jäljitellä vanhoja sanomalehtien sarjakuvasivuja, joissa niin kuin jaettiin useammaksi sarjaksi se sivu. Että itse asiassa Crazy Cat alkoi tällaisen yhden toisen sarjan sivusarjana tällä tavalla. So that the Crazy Cat thing sort of happened with you as well, that you eventually started publishing the cat strips by themselves.
At one time we discovered that anything about cats sold well, so we published Fat Freddy's Cat as a separate book.
And I heard that you drew them at a time when you didn't even have a cat.
The original model for Fat Freddy's Cat belonged to a friend of mine in Venice, California. Venice, California was cat heaven. It had canals instead of streets, and the canals were full of garbage, and there was birds and rats, and so my friend's cat was happy. When my friend's wife left him and took the cat with her, the cat found its way back to my friend's house from 5 miles away and came back to Venice.
That's where the food was. So when did you first come to Europe?
I visited England and France in the 70s, but I moved to England and then to Barcelona in 1980. I lived in Barcelona for 2 years, then went back to San Francisco, and then came back to Paris in 1985 just for a visit, but we ended up staying there. We lived in Paris for 33 years now.
So was it, which was the driving factor? Did you want to see other places, or did you want to leave America?
I think the most important thing was that comics were more respectable in Europe. In France, they called comic strips the ninth art. In America, comics are still considered children's literature. So when my old friends ask me, what have I done for the last part of my life, I say, I'm in the publishing business.
And in France, you can say that you're a cartoonist.
In France, I can proudly say, I am a cartoonist. Je suis un dessinateur de bande dessinée.
Eli merkittävä syy Eurooppaan tuloon oli se, että Ranskassa sarjakuvia arvostetaan niin paljon enemmän kuin Amerikassa edelleenkään. So you, is it more Paris or southern France where you now live?
Nowadays, I spend 5 days a week in central France in Burgundy and 2 days a week in Paris. After 33 years, Paris isn't as interesting as it was at first. It's noisy and the traffic is bad. So I prefer to live out in the country.
Because I guess much has been made of the fact that both you and Crumb happened to move to France, but is there any sort of expat community of artists, or was it just a coincidence of individual decisions?
Just coincidence. I don't know many Americans in France or any other country.
Eli 80-luvulta saakka hän on tosiaan asunut Ranskassa, ja vaikka Krumpkin nykyään asuu siellä, niin se on enemmän vaan yhteen sattuma kuin että olisi mikään liian taiteilijoiden yhteisö kyseessä. But in terms of community, when you look at your work, you've always had collaborators. Has that been more about having collaborators and having a community, or was it just simply a division of labor and having to divide the time?
Division of labor. Drawing is very difficult for me, so I always like to find artists that are better than myself to work on the drawing with me.
And I read at least at one point you were actually drawing the same size that was published.
Nowadays I've been doing that, but my eyes are getting so weak now that I'm 77 years old that I'm thinking about drawing larger, like most comic book artists do. Some Marvel comic guys, they draw the page that big.
But it seems incredible because the amount of detail in your work.
Well, but as a piece of artwork, I think the size that it's published at should be the same size it's drawn at.
To control it.
Just for the authenticity. It makes it real.
Eli hän on useita sarjakuvia on tehnyt yhteistyössä toisten piirtäjien kanssa, ja hän sanoi, että se on ihan työnjako ja että piirtäminen on vaan niin työlästä. Ja hän hämmästytti sanomalla, että monia sarjakuvia hän on oikeasti piirtänyt suoraan julkaisukokoon, mikä on hämmästyttävää, kun ajattelee kuinka yksityiskohtaisia ja täynnä pieniä viivoja ne on. Ja hän sanoi, että se on vaan niin kuin autenttisempaa sillä tavalla, että se alkuperäisteos on samassa koossa kuin se julkaistu.
I have to draw with jeweler's glasses of 4 or 8 magnification nowadays because I just can't see that small without my glasses.
So at least one series that you've been doing while living in France has been Not Quite Dead. So was that a new project that you started after you moved?
Yeah, after a number of years of the Freak Brothers, I used up all the jokes about marijuana, so I decided I wanted to do a strip about rock music instead. At one time, I had to make a choice between being a musician or a cartoonist myself, and I stuck with cartooning because I was making more money as a cartoonist than I was making it as a musician. In fact, musicians often make no money at all.
Especially nowadays. What was your instrument?
Pardon?
What was your instrument?
Keyboard.
Eli Ranskaan muuttua hän on ainakin tehnyt sarjakuvaa Not Quite Dead, ja hän sanoi, että kun marihuana loppui, niin oli vaadittava aihepiiri ja hän rupesi tekemään sarjakuvaa rockbändistä, ja että itsekin on ollut kiinnostunut musiikista ja olisi voinut päätyä myös muusikon uralle. Kohta on aika mun kysyä, että onko yleisöllä jotain kysyttävää, mutta jatketaan tässä vielä hetken ja kysytään tuoreimmista asioista. What have you been
working on recently?
Oh, the last few months I'm working on the Freak Brothers 50th anniversary book. There's 30 or 40 new pages of Freak Brothers and some more pages of unpublished things and a text of a little history of the Freak Brothers that I've written.
So is the anniversary next year or this year?
This year.
This year.
67 was the first Freak Brothers.
Eli Friikkilän veljesten 50-vuotisjuhlan kunniaksi on luvassa myös uutta sarjakuvaa. Onko yleisölle tullut mieleen jotain kysymyksiä? Severi?
Yes. In late 60s, you were published in British underground magazine called Us. And in 1970, they got in court you partially modified Trump and your Freak Brothers. Is that the only time that somebody got in legal trouble? You do your works?
Yes, the publishers of Oz magazine in England actually went to jail for corrupting the morals of youth. They had an issue that was edited by young people, underage, and this was the offense. Some of my pages were shown as evidence that I don't see anything corrupting in my pages that they offered as evidence, but 3 or 4 of the editors of Oz went to jail for short terms. One of them was Felix Dennis. The judge gave Felix Dennis a shorter sentence because Felix Dennis didn't have a university education like the others. And so when he got out of jail, Felix Dennis went on to become a multi-billionaire publisher.
Eli Englannissa sarjakuvien julkaisija joutui jopa vankilaan, koska materiaali oli niin tuomittava.
So you're in good company. You're in J.D. Salinger and no, I was thinking no, Lady Chatterley's Lover, who was writing for famous censorship case in the UK.
That was a famous censorship case. That and Ulysses, and the last one was Mattioli's Squeak the Mouse. It was prohibited for a while in America until Art Spiegelman took it to court and had it had the judgment overturned. Squeak the Mouse, if you've never seen it, is a hilarious parody of sex and drugs and Tom and Jerry cartoons with ultra violence. All these horrible things are happening. Hard to say that there's any reason to censor it, but Art Spiegelman who was the publisher of Raw magazine and wanted to publish these pages, had to take it to court and have it declared okay, and there's never been any subsequent censorship in the United States.
It feels like it would be even more difficult nowadays to publish a lot of this stuff. That some attitude seems to become stricter and stricter and more moralistic or something.
In the United States, what persecution there is, first, the booksellers are arrested or whatever, then the distributor, then the publisher, and last, the artists themselves. I can only think of one case where an artist has been persecuted in the United States. But no, freedom of press still exists pretty much in the United States.
With 50 years hindsight, what would you think is the lasting legacy of the hippie counterculture? I mean, on the one hand, I think Western societies have become more liberal for sure, but on the other hand, we have Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think the legacy still exists. I think the most important questions of the 60s were never answered.
What are those questions?
Government interference in the private life of the citizens, and that's in fact what Donald Trump is his strength. He's against government interference in people's private life, and that's why so many people like him, so even ex-hippies. I have a friend, Jewish, Harvard educated, and he voted for Donald Trump. That's hard to understand, but that happens.
So how much do you still have contacts in America, and do you still visit, or is your how fully is your life in France now?
Oh, I don't like to travel on airplanes anymore. What a hassle it is to go through all that security and long waiting in lines at the airport, so I try to avoid airplane travel now.
Onko muita kysymyksiä?
Have you been keeping up with the American underground or alternative comic book scene, and how do you feel about later works that are probably influenced by your art, such as Peter Bag's Hate and other comics?
I'm out of touch with the contemporary American comic scene. For me, the young new guys are Peter Bag and Dan Clowes, and they're in their 50s.
Maybe I could ask one more about your times as a publisher. So many of the other underground cartoonists also were sort of experimenting with the form, and there was not only the subject matter but also the form and playing with the visual language and doing really experimental work. I guess you were sort of the most traditional of the group in the sense that you were doing jokes and you were doing the stories and you had regular characters. How much did the sort of more experimental comics appeal to you?
I think that the story is more important than the artwork. A good comic strip can have bad artwork if it has a good story, but good artwork and a bad story doesn't make a good comic strip. I've never read a Marvel comic. I just can't read that sort of stuff. It's so stupid. Even though the artwork is good sometimes.
Eli hänelle sarjakuvissa tarina on tärkeämpää kuin kuvat. Huonotkin kuvat kantaa, jos on hyvä tarina.
In the 60s, how did you manage to bypass the monopoly of distributors? They would only distribute Comics Code approved comics, and yours were not.
At first, we sold comics in what were called head shops, the shops that sold rock posters and pipes and cigarette papers and things like that, until the police decided that if they were selling water pipes but saying that they were for tobacco, but at the same time they were selling Freak Brothers comics, which were sort of an instruction booklet on how to smoke marijuana. But fortunately, comic books shops started to appear, and so soon all of our distribution of underground comics was done through comic book stores, and it still is.
Well, I guess this leads me to ask a question. I'm sure this must be the question you get asked a lot, but what role have drugs played in your life? That's a topic of the comics, but was it just the topic of the comics?
Well, a lot of the marijuana jokes are just old alcohol jokes, substituting marijuana for alcohol. For me,
oh, now I get the Virgil Parch connection too.
Yeah, Virgil Parch did a lot of alcohol jokes. I'm not, well, my drugs are alcohol, coffee, refined sugar, and if it's available, I still like to smoke marijuana. But by the way, marijuana is not addictive like tobacco and alcohol and some other things.
And sugar.
Sugar, yes. I can't live without sugar. I've got to have some sugar, man.
Eli paljon Friikkilän veljesten huumorista oli itse asiassa päivitettyjä vanhoja vitsejä alkoholista. Onko vielä kysymyksiä?
Well, maybe then we should say thank you. Thank you for coming.
Ja hän on luvannut signeerata tuolla oven suussa olevalla pöydällä, eli jos ette rynnistä tähän, vaan muodostetaan jono sinne pöydän viereen. Kiitoksia kun tulitte.